Welcome, everyone, to today's episode. I'm very excited about our guest who is with me today, called George Just. He is the Chief Revenue Officer and brings over 30 years of experience in sales and channel leadership, who is guiding companies to scale their growth and revenue. George has helped organizations face several of the toughest challenges today that include ransomware, digital extortion, and also the scaling of new technology for compliance and acceptance. So, George, it's an absolute privilege to have you here on the show today with us. Where are you calling in from?
Hey Darren, good to be here. I am calling in from Chicago.
How's the weather up there?
It is a beautiful late summer day today, so it's actually hit the right notes. This is the kind of day that makes Chicago a great place to live. But if you talked to me in February, I probably wouldn't say the same thing.
Because you're in 20 inches of snow, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Well, welcome to the show. For everybody listening, we're going to go through George's background, all the industry trends that he's seeing, discussing current state of the items that are going on, and also what he sees for the future. So, George, let's just start with the simple questions. Can you share a little bit about your role as a CRO and how you fit into companies' bigger picture?
Yeah, sure. So CRO is an interesting title. It would just be called sales leader, VP of sales, or something like that in a bigger company. But basically, what it is, as a CRO, you're kind of wear a lot of different hats all at the same time, and you have to switch a lot of times in the same conversation from one to the other. But you're product management, you're marketing. You're not necessarily a chief marketing officer, but you're heavily influential on marketing and messaging. You're the front line of getting customer feedback and dialing that back into messaging and dialing that back into product. So there's a lot of things that you do at the same time, and cybersecurity makes it extra interesting and challenging because what the technology moves so quickly, and the need for innovative and novel solutions to problems, and this is because of the threat landscape and because what the bad guys are doing on the other side of this equation. They move fast, and a technology that solved a problem a year ago and is now ready for market might no longer solve the problem. And so that's what you have to wrestle with, and you have to take that and render that technology into something that's acceptable for a buyer who maybe not be technical at all, or on the other hand, somebody who's extraordinarily technical, and you have to act constantly straddle that line. And so it's a very challenging thing to do, but it's equally rewarding because of it.
Let's dig down into that a little bit more. So that's the high level. So when it
Yeah.
comes to a CRO, when technology is constantly changing, like you said, something might be released is already a year late and when due to it being a year in development. So, where does that come into play for your role? How do you help make sure that that doesn't happen and you're keeping up to date with those items?
Yeah. So at in startups and in innovative companies in this space, you have a pretty quick feedback loop into what is needed. We see this. Let me just explain it maybe from a technical solution standpoint. So when a vulnerability is identified, and this is in a lot of the security tools that are out there. Vulnerabilities are typically closed pretty quickly, but there's this window that bad guys jump into to, kind of exploit the vulnerability and do things. And then everybody puts their patches in, and then, it gets everything secure again. So this is defensive, right? So this is all defensive measures, right? It's a hole in the fence that is then exploited. So you go and patch the hole in the fence, and now you're okay with that, yeah, that spot of the fence. But in the meantime, there's a back door that the lock has been picked and is rendered open, right? So now what are we going to do to fix that? So it's this constant game of whack-a-mole of fixing things and patching things. So there's already of a sensitivity in the technology space to be able to fix things quickly because of the offensive threat that is looking at us. So if you take their perspective, right, instead of a defensive posture, look at it from an offensive position from the other side and what's looking in. So when you can take that into account and actually look at it from the other side, you see some of the things that you need to change. And a lot of it is it at times not a highly technical solution. Sometimes it's a very simple, straightforward solution to a problem. And when you can actually address it that way, you get there a lot quickly. So it's taking that speed and actually trying to look around the corner a little bit. And when you can actually have an organization that spends its time looking around the corner and anticipating what the next thing is going to be, Then it becomes, okay, I have a solution for what's coming at us. Now, how do I get this to market very quickly? And that is that's the rub, right? So it's hard to mass market something in this space. It doesn't resonate. You can't pierce messaging. You can't get through to people that need it. So how do you actually respond in ways? And it's all sorts of interesting ways that you can do it. One is doing stuff like this, right? Is doing, innovative LinkedIn post. It's doing little quick messaging, and it's just getting in front of the right people at the right time. And I use a term in a lot of times in cybersecurity. What you are literally doing is selling a life preserver to a drowning man. And if you're the one holding the life preserver and somebody is drowning and you need money before you're going to throw it at them, they're going to empty their wallet at you. And that's kind of like a false sense of good sales technique, right? So it doesn't really matter what you did at that point. You have the solution, they have the problem, and you're the only solution that's in front of them right at that second. They need it, they open a wallet. That's not good discipline, right? So it is how to pierce through that, and the attitudes that permeate from sales organizations when they're in that environment become this kind of false positive, if you will, on what works and what doesn't, because you're actually just in a we've all heard terms like shooting fish in a barrel, right, in sales, but that's kind of what it is. You have the only solution that they need right at that moment. So how do you make sure that you're the one they call when they have a problem, even though they don't perceive they need you today? They are probably going to need you in the future. So how do you get from there to where you're the person? It has to be more than, break glass in case of emergency and putting your name up on the wall. This is the person you called. It has to be a little bit more than that. And that's where it gets interesting, and trying to get your messaging through to be a little more proactive, stay engaged, do things that are valuable in the meantime when the sale is coming, but the sale isn't going to be there yet because they just don't perceive the need today, even though they're going to be there.
All right. And you kind of mentioned, you kind of hinted at this, but let's go into more detail. So, what would you say are the top three ways to make sure that you're at the front of mind when they're in that panic mode and need to have that life preserver?
Yeah, I think the most key thing, and this is what I would advise any organization or any individual salesperson, is to be relevant in the moment, right? So there are things that you can do, and this is sales techniques that we've the general we have been using for years and trying to instill in salespeople. It's to be relevant outside of what you perceive to be a sales cycle. So giving things of value, right? And this is not sending them a gift. This is actually giving them something of value, of real value to them. And whether that be a piece of threat intelligence, whether that be, keeping an eye out for the tool stack they use and saying, hey, just want to make you aware there was this vulnerability exposed. And if you have this combination of X, Y, and Z in your environment, you really need to look at your tool set. I'm not solving that problem for you. That's not something you're buying from me. That's people you already bought stuff from. You have to go pressure them to fix what is broken. But I'm the one who told you that those things were broken in combination or broken, because all those individual folks are not necessarily going to tell you that. So solving that problem for them, being a trusted advisor, true trusted advisor, it's an overused term sometimes, but being an actual trusted advisor in that moment sets you up for then continuing that process. And now they have opened their ears and their minds to continue to talk to you. So that's a big thing. It's little snippets of genuineness, if that's a word, but being able to be truthful and honest in every moment. And that doesn't mean it's always you have a reason to call them and set up a 30-minute presentation. That might mean it's a 90-second phone call, right? That might mean it's a drop in with something they might be interested in. Those types of things that are just genuine and human really do resonate. So I think those types of things that you can lay out really benefit you when it's time for them to then be in the buying mode, then be top of the line and top of mind for them to come and talk to when they say, hey, we're here's the other thing, right? So a lot of times, a lot of the tool sets, especially in cybersecurity, and this is true in networking, it's true in everything, right? They're on long-term contracts, right? And the thing that big vendors do, right, is they make sure that those dates always keep moving out over time. So your renewal is always more than 12 months in the future, right? You do any upgrade, any change, whatever, I'm going to co-term you, right? They think you think they're doing you a great big favor. What they're actually doing is moving a renewal date as far out into the future as possible, because then you're a captive customer. So how do you wrestle with that? You have to displace somebody who they already are under contract with, or seemingly displace somebody they're already in contract with, and then wait for that renewal date to happen. But that renewal date keeps getting pushed out because they're the incumbent. So what do you have to change your messaging in what you're doing and what you're selling to be an adjunct to what they already have. So start small, get a nibble at it. What can I get out of this? What can I add value to their existing, even though I might be able to solve the same problem that their existing vendor, solve it better, do it cheaper, do it all sorts of stuff. That's like classic. I can give you features and benefits and, make it financially acceptable to you and everything else. But I'm taking a big swing there. Are the chances of me displacing that vendor very good or not? They're probably not. They're just, the deck is stacked against you at that moment. But can I give you a little bit of something they don't have? And now I gain a footprint in there and I gain that beachhead. And now I can prove my value as I can expand. So a land and expand strategy starting very small is another effective way to do that. So those are some of the techniques that I think are very effective.
And that's great detail. I really like that land and expand piece as well, because people are too busy trying to hit a home run where sometimes a whole bunch of singles still gets the run in, right?
It still does, right? I mean, you stack hits, you station to station. I mean, you we can use sports analogies all day long, but that's exactly what you do. I mean, and that's the truth. Who wins football games, right? Those who control the ball and control the turnover ratio. That's who is going to win the game, right? It's not the person who has the big play and then doesn't have a good defense. That doesn't work, right? That's the same kind of stuff.
All right. So let's take that now into industry trends. So that's,
Yep.
staying in front of the customer. But in regards to cybersecurity in its world right now, what are the key shifts that you're seeing in the industry around ransomware? Like you were saying, the technology is advancing. What do you see currently?
Yeah, so there's two things, especially with respect to ransomware and in digital extortion more broadly, right? So what is ransomware? Ransomware is an extortion scheme, right? So at its basis, it is I'm going to steal something from you and I will sell it back to you. It's kidnapping, if you want to think of it that way, but that's exactly what it is. I've stolen your bank account. I will sell it back to you for, X dollars, and here's your bank account back, but I take my cut to give it back to you, right? Instead of a fence, I'm going to sell it back to the person I sold it from. Those are the kind of things that we're talking about more broadly. So what has changed is, instead of this technical thing, and this is, a trend over, probably at this point 6 or 7 years now. It used to be doing small hits, trying to get $500 out of somebody, trying to get a money card out of somebody, just doing this personal extortion kind of stuff. And the bad guys started to learn how to, well, if I extort a human for $500, what if I extort his company for $50,000? And it was like, well, now what if I hit a bigger company? It's $500,000, and an even bigger company, and it's $50 million. Or I'm going to go bust a casino and, break out with $70 million. Those kind of things happen, right? They so they got very sophisticated. And so the trend that I have seen over the biggest trend I've seen over the last, 6 or 7 years, is how sophisticated from a business standpoint the bad guys have gotten. So they have established an entire ecosystem, and its entire business ecosystem that is equal in a lot of ways to what we are on this side of the world. They're domiciled in places that where what they're doing isn't illegal. It's not only not illegal, it's encouraged, So what do? Well, they said they have HR departments, they have recruiting, they have benefits. I've seen an ad where they were advertising for bad guys wherever you happen to be. Come work for us. We don't even care where you live. You're just United States. We'll send you the laptop that's untraceable. We'll put you on salary for $140,000 a year. You'll get a benefits package. You can work your own hours, and let's go, right? And if your moral compass or your risk tolerance for getting caught are okay, it's not a bad job for somebody who's a coder for a living or something like that, right? It's not a bad gig. But the reality is it's not legal here. But they do a heavy recruiting in Eastern Europe, in Asia, in Middle East. And those are what we're faced with. But don't think that it's not that black hoodied person sitting in a basement somewhere that's doing this. This is a highly organized, decentralized operation that is coming after us. So we can bust individual threat actors, and we see these. They end up on sanctions lists and all sorts of things like that. But you cut off one head and eight others, it's a hydra, right? They just keep coming at you, and it's really hard to grasp that. So counting on law enforcement to be able to crack all of that is just, it's a fallacy. We can't wait for that to happen. So private industry needs to do most of the protection, and that's just the reality. So what you have to do is you have to, think and operate as if you were a bad guy, or at least prepare from that perspective. So dark web intelligence has become really, really a key piece of this. So if you don't have deep dark web intelligence about what those folks are doing to attack us, you're going to be less than able to actually, gauge your defenses and respond correctly. So that kind of came in. So dark web intelligence happened. But what ended up happening is threat intelligence just became this volume game. So now if I'm consuming threat intelligence, I was getting 10 alerts a day years ago. I now have 1,000 alerts a day or 10,000 alerts a day. And a lot of them are nominal and they're not important. But the problem is I get 1,000 alerts. One of them is really important. So now how do I figure out the one important one that I need to pay attention to? Or do I need to have a staff of 100 all looking at 100 things every day to figure out which one is? So now it becomes, completely cumbersome and untenable to use this kind of intelligence coming at me. So now we have AI tools to sort that out. We have AI enabled threat intelligence to actually sort through it and make it contextual and everything that's coming in. So a lot of things have happened to actually gauge that down. But alert fatigue is the term that is used. But too much intelligence or noise and not signal is not good, right? Signal without intelligence is not good. So all these things can just be very noisy. You can shovel a haystack at somebody and say, find the needle, or you can just grab the needle and hand them the needle. That's what we're really trying to do broadly in that sense. So hopefully that answers the question.
Are there any tools out there that you recommend that have that built-in AI in order to assist avoiding that notification fatigue?
There's a lot of folks that do it. I would hesitate to name them because everybody will say they're an AI enabled right now, right? So it is not it has become the buzzword of the year. I think is AI enabled, blah blah blah, AI enabled, blah blah blah, and it's no matter what it is. So it's important, I think, to actually dig whoever you're talking to about that is what is the AI actually doing? Is there still a human in the loop? That's one of the keys. I think that would be what I would look for is if they say there's a human in the loop, vet that out. Is there really a human in the loop? What does that look like? Because just having an AI engine deliver some contextual alerts isn't quite enough. You actually need some human intelligence. Think about how this stuff operates, right? At some point, if we just have AI agent on this side, AI agent on the other side going at each other, they're going to learn, the techniques that each side is learning. And, at some point, this guy's going to be ahead, bad guy ahead, and then we're ahead, and then bad guy ahead, and then we're ahead. But where there's humans involved, you can do things like, creativity and, artistic input and a little more psychology involved and things like that. That actually gets you to be able to peek around that corner. So I think that is the key that you want to look for.
All right. And then if you're willing to share, going back to something you mentioned at the beginning, I'm very curious, where did you see the advertisement pop up on your feed in order to go work for, a hacking syndicate?
um it was on the dark web, which is available to all of us. I don't know which exact form it is, but this is maybe I'll talk about this for a minute. So one of the
Sure.
one of the kind of misunderstood things is the term dark web, right? Just in itself, the common human on our side of the world who's not in cybersecurity just thinks the dark web is some mysterious other network that only bad guys use, right? And they just think it's maybe a giant data center in China and in Russia and whatever. And then you get this super secret, password to get into it, and then you're operating in this thing. It's not what it is. The dark web exists on the same wires, in the same servers, in the same racks as the web that we are all connected to right now. I guarantee you, 100% guarantee that the server we are connected to at Zoom right now, somewhere in that data center, either in the same rack or the rack next to it, is a server that is mostly dark web stuff, right? All the wires connect. The only difference in the dark web is it's unindexed, so you can't search for it, right? So you can't type in a search term and get to it. You can't, it's not part of the same thing. You have to know exactly where you're going to go. And then when you get there, there's some way to sign on, which you have to be either authenticate or been given a password or something like that. So once you're in that forum or that whatever it is, you're on the dark web, whether you wanted to be or not, you're there. We, on our side of the world, we use dark web stuff all the time. There is, if you want to store stuff on the web that you only want your DevOps team to be looking at, you store it on the web, but you unindex it to make it unsearchable. That is technically dark web behavior, right? That is what that is. It's not in the light. So we do that all the time. So there's all of that right now. A lot of law enforcement is pretty good at watching and penetrating a lot of that stuff because it's all connected. So what the bad guys have done is to go deeper, right? And I don't know if you saw the show The Wire way back when, right? So this was, you know, well, we're up on it. This is when what phones were connected with the wires, right? It was not all cellular at that point, and everybody, didn't have wire connected phones anymore. So what did the bad guys do in that, right? They started using burner phones, and they'd use them for a week, throw them in the garbage, hand out everybody a new one, use them for a week, right? The bad guys are doing the same thing now with Signal and Telegram and WhatsApp and all these other kind of encrypted chat processes that they're using, and they do the same thing, and then they find an out of band channel to communicate where their new channel is going to be. So a channel you're not watching, perhaps in a gamers forum, in a chat room, in some weird obscure video game, that's where the indicator is. So unless you've actually penetrated that, you're not going to be able to follow these guys as they bounce around and talk about their nefarious activities and who they're targeting and what new tools they're using and everything else. So it's a game of cat and mouse, and it exists right under our noses. It's right there. It's just you've got to know how to look and where to look.
Okay. Well, and if you were to recommend to someone where they need to be looking, what would you tell them that is? Like, what are the
I
key areas?
pretty simple. If this is not a do-it-yourself project, so it is absolutely hire an expert or an organization that has that expertise in house and has been doing it for a long time. And one of the things that you will find is a lot of the name your cybersecurity company that is publicly traded specifically don't have their people operating on the dark web because it's a gamble, right? You're operating in a gray area when you're doing that. And so they don't want their people accessing it. They don't want their systems connected to it. So they put serious blocks on. So you have to look for organizations that do that for a living and only that for a living, and engage with them or engage with somebody who is engaged with them to have that window into that world. And that allows you to have that other perspective that I think is necessary at this point. You just can't fly blind. You can't only defend yourself anymore by making sure you have good door locks and closing your windows, right? There is a more sophisticated threat that if you can catch them before they're in your house, you're going to have a much better chance of not being successfully attacked and breached than if you wait for them to be in your house and try to throw them out fast. Most of the tool sets that are in existence are the latter, right? They are, once they're in, I'm gonna, find them fast and throw them out fast before they do too much damage. That's what most of the tools are geared towards. And you have to be informed by the tools that will tell you when somebody is targeting you as well.
So when you're thinking about the companies that you work for, what is working really well right now? And then where are you finding the biggest challenges?
So the biggest challenges, I think, and I can answer it, and I'll answer it in two ways. The biggest challenges are acceptance that the bad guys are as good as they are. So there's this complacency of, I haven't been breached this year, therefore I must be fine. And the answer is you probably not. There are stats in the insurance, the cyber insurance world uses these types of stats where the average organization has, I don't know, 10 to 15% chance of being breached in any given year. So you give that horizon, and every 8 years, you're going to get nailed, right? It just kind of looks that way. So what do you do? And organizations don't always reveal everything. You don't have to, state when, certain events have happened. You don't have to state that publicly. When certain events happen, though, you do have to state it publicly, right? If, consumer data has been breached, or if all of those things, you have to actually, release that kind of stuff. But a lot of stuff, is just kind of flies under the radar, and it's minimal stuff that are contained, or they're contained, acceptably, I guess, and kind of get brushed off. But the the containment is one thing, and that's one aspect of it. But the other is to actually do a good job of auditing your defenses, and at the same time informing yourself about what their offenses are going to be next. Because whatever tool set you have deployed today, they are doing an excellent job exploiting that already. And in your current on your vulnerabilities, I mean, there are solutions out there that just look at your own vulnerability stack. The average, you know, uh, company right now has 80 unpatched vulnerabilities today, right? Well, it takes me a day or two or three or a week to get to them, and there's a new one next week. So how am I ever going to clear that list of vulnerabilities, right? So there exists a lot of technology to go in and patch those automatically and do all those kind of things. You have to be doing all that stuff. But once again, that's protecting your perimeter, when what you really should be worried about is, why is somebody going to attack me? How are they going to attack me? What do I need to be doing that I'm not doing now? Because just because I've locked my doors doesn't mean I don't have an insider threat already sitting right here. Look at my hiring practices. What's the easiest way to breach a network? Get hired, right? You get hired, you get a laptop, you get the passwords, you're in. Do you know that I'm not a half bad guy when you hired me? You better vet that out, right? So look at hiring practices. Look at what you're doing, especially with remote workers. Are they who they say they are? Are they really? I had a case that I was aware of anyway, where it was a principal in an organization. They were bringing two organizations together, and the principal of the organization being brought in, represented themselves as being a Western European. He was really a Russian national, part of the oligarchy, and tied into some really bad people. But he had a complete social profile. He had, kids going to Western schools. He had everything looked on the up and up. But an investigation turns out, a dark web style investigation turns out, this is not who they said they were. And they were able to protect themselves from essentially getting into bed with this person that they shouldn't have been in bed with. So those types of things you have to do. So it's a lot of innovative thinking really is the key. So that complacency and that reliance on what we've been doing for the last 5 years, and it's been okay, therefore we're just going to keep doing it. That is the biggest challenge right there.
What recommendation would you tell leaders that try to sell that up the chain, right? Because to your point of
Yeah.
complacency, if everything's working fine and the revenue's coming in, they're less likely to change to where, when the example you gave of them drowning and they need the life vest, they're going to do it right then. So, what tricks and recommendations do you have for everyone listening for how they can get the buy-in to do this stuff proactively instead of waiting until the disaster occurs?
Yeah, it is to truly identify the risk, not from an emotional risk standpoint. That is like, that's tired. That's played. You can't motivate by fear. It's not going to work. Hey, if we don't do this, we're going to be out of business. We're going to get ransomed, and we're all going to be out of a job, right? You can't do that style of messaging internally, and you can't as a vendor coming in doing that either. So what you actually have to do is take a sober look and look at it like a CFO looks at numbers, right? Look at it like an investor looks at a long-term investment. Look at it from those types of aspects, not a technical aspect, right? Because where you're going to have to penetrate, and you might be a technical person that believes that I have to do this new tool set in order to protect myself better. So the vendor did a great job explaining it, that this is what we have to do, and you agree, right? Now I got to go get money to do this. I have to adjust budget. I have to do something. At that point, It is no longer a technical sale. And you have to just divorce yourself from that idea that I'm going to go sell this technically. This is a better widget. It has one feature this doesn't have, and this feature is really important. So what? What it really means, and think of it like a board member or CFO at that point, is how much risk am I reducing by taking this step, right? When you can quantify that, even though it's estimates and it's a lot of it's prediction and everything else, there is still a way to do that. When I said that, insurance company rates somebody at maybe a 12% risk of getting a breach, if I can move that by 2%, right? 2%, that's a significant risk reduction. So if I can make the case that I reduce your risk from a 12% this year to a 10% this year of getting breached, and I can effectively make that argument, I have just created the budget that I need to go do it. And that's the key. But if you can't do that, you're probably just going to be continuing to be frustrated and continuing to use the tools that you have and not going to get the new stuff that you want. The other is to be creative with existing vendors, right? To say, hey, I'm buying, I use threat intelligence feed just as an example, but there are a ton of examples like this. So I don't want to beat up on only that. But I'm buying a threat intelligence feed and it costs me $10,000 a month. And I'm getting a lot of alerts, right? The cost per alert is really small, but I'm getting so much information, it's unusable. So why don't I just dial that down and buy something that is a little more high fidelity? I know I feel comfortable because I think if I'm getting 10,000 alerts, I'm getting them all, right? I just have this sense of comfort that it is comprehensive. The reality is it might be comprehensive and the really important ones are in there, but unless I do something to sort through those or only get high fidelity ones in, that's going to make a difference. So what if I dial that down a little bit budget wise? Maybe instead of 10,000, buy a little less volume because a lot of them are priced by volume. That's one reason the volume is high. So maybe dial that down a little bit and get something unique in or something different in and actually put it next to it. And that's the kind of things I would do. So, aim at numbers that make sense to boards, to CFOs, and then aim at technical solutions that are a little bit more innovative and maybe a little bit more novel that don't displace what you have, but move it to the side.
That's some great advice. I really appreciate the level of detail you just went in there. When it comes to the outcomes, when you're working with client metrics, the outcomes of the companies that you work for, what are you most focused on in improving this year?
So the key we can always say is to not get breached, right? Cybersecurity is great. I want to make sure that you're protected for the year. I think what you should really look at is instead of you know, saying I'm going to reduce it to zero, make sure that the impact of any event that does happen is going to be minimized. So I'm putting stuff in place that's going to minimize the inevitable, right? So if I can have something in place that says, when, instead of saying if, but when something happens, I'm going to make it 50% less impactful. That is a win, right? So accept that somebody's going to, it's like running a retail business in a major city, right? At some point, somebody's going to shoplift. At some point, somebody might throw something through your window and try to get at the cash register. You're just going to have to accept that you're not 100% protected from that. But you can do steps to make sure you don't keep cash in the drawer overnight. You can do all those kind of things to minimize the impact of an event. And if you focus on that, I think you're going to have a much better solution overall.
So ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, don't ever think you're gonna reduce it to zero because that's just a false sense of security that just doesn't exist. So let's make sure that we're actually reducing impact by what we do, and I think that's a better thing to focus on.
Probably also striving for that unattainable 100% is very expensive also.
Yeah, exactly. And
All
and
right.
and I mean, we can use examples in literally any day. You can say who was breached today, right? You can look it up and look. And it's organizations, from their size, they have spent every dollar conceivably possible to protect themselves, right? You don't think major casino breach, you don't think they're spending every single penny they can on security? Of course they are. It doesn't matter. The throwing money at that problem is not the only thing. You got to make sure you're spending the money you're going to throw at it very wisely and making sure instead of one from column A, B, C, D, and E, maybe there's column Z that you hadn't thought of that you spend a little bit of that money on to make sure that you have broader protection and the ability to minimize impact.
So let's go ahead and focus on the future now with the goals
Yeah.
and industry trends. So starting with the industry level, in the next 12 to 24 months, what do you see happening?
So I think AI is significant, right? And I think um, the challenge in AI is to balance, as I said, the human piece of it. I mean, if you've studied AI at all, you realize it learns things very quickly, right? But it can also learn wrong things very quickly, right? And then rely on them. So you have to make sure that there is a feedback loop in there to make sure it's good, that you're not releasing stuff publicly by misusing AI that ends up in the wrong hands and then ends up being used against you. So there's a lot of things that you have to do. So I think the impact of AI is really important, and it's important broadly and throughout industry, right? Not just ours. But I think the impact is very significant. So what you can do to enable the humans that you have to be more effective in threat hunting, in cybersecurity perspective protection, in doing vulnerability patching, in doing all those other kind of things is very important. I think it's key. There's also some other things that I think that we kind of almost forgotten about in the noise, but there are things like multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication has been around for a while, but there's also techniques the bad guys have leveraged, like SIM swapping and everything else, that pierces right through that. So, okay, do I still rely on MFA and think I'm good as long as I send a text out that says, with an authorization number, and if the authorization number comes back, I give the guys key to the kingdom? That's maybe not as good anymore. So look at like machine level authentication, right? That doesn't have that ability. It's like tied to your specific machine. There's an algorithm that is only if your machine is trying to access it. So if somebody physically steals your machine, they might be able to get through that, even though there's other factors that, compensate for that. But most of the time, our actual physical machines are not stolen. That's pretty hard to do from, let's just pick on Russia. It's pretty hard for a Russian to steal my phone today, right? But it's not as hard for a Russian to steal my phone number or to SIM swap me or to get access to my stream of phone information and my text stream. That's not as difficult, right? It's pretty hard to grab my phone physically unless you're sitting in this room with me, but it's not so hard to penetrate my communication channel with T-Mobile, right? That's not as hard to do. So those kind of things I think are really important, and that those are the trends that I'd be looking at.
And so when you talk about machine, you're talking about like matching the MAC address and other
Yeah,
identifiers in the registry to make it unique to yourself.
there's some techniques out there that take time of day, making sure you are where you say you are, where you're supposed to be, combined with your MAC address, combined with your buried in some sort of algorithm that only your machine can possess because it checks things that are just sitting in there, memory register and serial number of the solid state drive and all that other kind of stuff that all matters, right? And it creates a digital signature of your actual hardware. And that digital signature is what is used to part of what is used to authenticate, right? Those types of things are pretty novel techniques, but boy, oh boy, aren't they important.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. If you don't have that level of detail, obviously texts are able to be stolen. But so what is your opinion of MFA when it comes to like using an authentication app?
Well, you should, right? It's still your best option for the average human, right? And how many of us still don't use it? Or it's annoying to us. Therefore, we skip it, right? Would
Right.
you like to? We've all seen this screen. You know, use another method. Skip, right? I'll skip it. That's human nature. I need to get in this right now. I'm going to skip setting up whatever it is, MFA, authenticator app, whatever it is. I just keep skipping it until it will not let me skip it anymore. And then I set it up. But the reality is, if you don't discipline yourself to use that stuff, you're just leaving yourself open. And it's you have to stop thinking of it as an annoyance And think about it just in us humans, naturally resistant to that. If the company doesn't demand that kind of stuff, if your organization doesn't demand that you do those things in order as a condition of employment, your organization is at risk. So you have to actually have that stuff be mandatory. And I know it's annoying, and I know it's costly, and I know it's maybe, cost inefficiency and everything else, but you're just leaving a door open that you don't need to leave open. So do everything you can do without putting in new stuff first. Of course, it's the think about how we protect our homes, right? What do? A lot of us put a burglar alarm company sign in our front yard. Well, if somebody's rolling down the street and there's sign, no sign, dog, 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 no dog, fence, 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 no fence. I don't know. Where do you think I'm going? I'm not going to mess with the alarm and the dog and the fence. That one looks soft. Make yourself look like a hard target. Unfortunately for your neighbor, they're going to be a target, the soft target, but it's not my job to protect them. It's my job to protect me. And as hard as you can make yourself as a target is really what you got to do.
That's a great analogy. I know and most people are more afraid of the dog than they are the actual security in the house,
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly. Yeah.
So when it comes to focusing on the future, you mentioned a little bit ago, but when you're focusing on your company itself, what is like the magic wand fix that would break them out of where they are currently to get that faster progress towards its success?
So, the biggest thing I think is to do an effective pen testing is an overused term. You can get them very inexpensively, but you can actually do them that are very good. Having somebody actually attack you is the most eye-opening thing that you can do, but you have to take it very seriously. And the person that you have attacking you on behalf of yourself today, make sure it's somebody else in 6 months. So testing your defenses are the most important thing you can do, and doing it regularly and not doing it like it's checkmark, taking it very seriously. And then the next piece would be to make sure you have a breach plan. What happens? I mean, literally, just conceptualize this, right? Any organization, if I lose access to all my systems overnight, and all I see is a ransom note, what am I doing? What is the next thing I do? If the next thing I do is I don't know, you are not prepared. The next thing has to be so ingrained in the organization that everybody knows what they're supposed to do at that minute. And it doesn't mean rehearsing this every first quarter every year and then putting it in a binder somewhere and throwing it on somebody's desk. It means making sure it's a part of your culture, making sure that you have a way to train and make sure you have a way to respond, because that can happen. And we've seen it happen, in the work I've been doing. It happens to people that don't think they're a target. A sole proprietor lawyer, right? What, who would possibly want to attack me? I have 10 clients that are even moderately big, and they're not very much bigger than me. And then I got a couple other people I do, work for, by the hour. Am I a target? Yes, you are. Because what's the data worth? What's the data that you're storing in the cloud worth, right? Or what's the data sitting on your laptop worth? If you leave that exposed, that data is worth something. Is it worth $50,000, $500,000, $5 million? Maybe. There might be some records in there that are worth more than that, depending on who your clients are. But you think you're not a target? Uh-uh. You absolutely are. And then, because everybody understands why a multi-billion-dollar investment bank is a target, or a multi-million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar law firm is a target. But what about a small medical office? Who comes in, right? Who doesn't want their medical records released, right? We're all very familiar with HIPAA and everything else, and we, use all sorts of protection. But what about consultations that happen? What about things that happen that are a little more personal? Or how often somebody in your family is getting mental health, and you don't really want that, brandied about like everybody has it. All those things are important. They all become value to a bad guy. So everybody's a target. They have to think that way. And if you think that way first, accept that first, and then think like a bad guy second, I think you're going to be better armed to be able to protect yourself from that.
George, that has been incredible information. And I also want to thank you for your time today because this conversation has been incredible with all of the details that you've gone into. I think it's going to really help our listeners a lot. So, from the
That
ransomware to evolving challenges in cybersecurity, all that, along with your own unique approaches, are going to be very insightful. So, for everybody listening, feel free to check out George on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll be able to find him just by the name and lookup. Is that right,
you
George?
bet. Yep, just George Just. Yep, you got it.
Yep. So you're more than welcome to find him there and reach out if you guys have additional questions. And as always, thank you all for listening, George, and thank you again for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You bet. Thanks, Darren.
All right. Thank you, George.
Bye. Bye.
Hey there, it's Darren from The Digital Shift. I wanted to take a moment to thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to check out the links in the description to learn even more information of everything we went over today. But if you enjoyed this podcast, then you are absolutely going to love this one. And if you're looking to look deeper into the technology that we go over in these videos, then go ahead and check out this one here. Regardless of which one you pick, you're going to walk away with something new. As always, I'll talk to you in the next one and keep being awesome.